Hello, this is Tony Heller from RealClimateScience.com, setting the record straight about climate. It's time for my first annual State of the Climate address. First, I'm going to discuss some important climate deadlines. June 29, 1989, UN predicts disaster if global warming not checked. A senior United Nations environmental official says entire nations could be wiped off the face of the earth by rising sea levels if global warming trend is not reversed by the year 2000. Coastal flooding and crop failures would create an exodus of eco-refugees threatening political chaos, said Noel Brown, director of the New York office of the UN Environment Program. He said governments have a 10-year window of opportunity to solve the greenhouse effect before it goes beyond human control. As the warming melts polar ice caps, ocean levels will rise up to 3 feet, enough to cover the Maldives and other flat island nations, Brown told the Associated Press in an interview on Wednesday. Well, this is really bad news. Those poor people back 20 years ago who not only had to deal with the devastation of Y2K, also had to deal with global warming destroying the planet in the same year. And in 1988, the Canberra Times announced that the Maldives would be underwater by the year 2018, and they'd run out of drinking water by the year 1992. If that wasn't bad enough, NASA's leading climate experts said the Arctic would be ice-free sometime between the years 2013 and 2018. And Congressional Democrats said Dr. Hansen was right. 20 years later, we recognize him as a climate prophet. The brilliant Dr. Hansen not only predicted that the Arctic would be ice-free by 2018, but he also predicted that lower Manhattan would be underwater the same year. But the horrors keep getting worse. Nobel laureate Al Gore predicted that the Arctic might be ice-free by the year 2014. And 20 years after their original deadline, the United Nations now says we only have until the year 2020 to stop climate catastrophe. This is all terrible, and The Guardian says that Britain will have a Siberian climate by the year 2020, nuclear conflict, mega droughts, famine, and widespread rioting will erupt across the world. The Guardian also says that the UK has been in a permanent drought for the past 8 years. And the Australian Bureau of Meteorology says that Australia has been in a permanent drought for the past 12 years. And it's been almost 20 years since experts announced the end of snow. And if all this isn't bad enough, NASA's leading climate expert predicted that we might have a new ice age by the year 2021. So apparently we're all going to burn up in a new ice age by next year. Now I'm going to report on the desperate state of the climate using only official government data. Arctic sea ice extent is higher than 2019, 2018, 2017, 2016, 2015, 2014, 2013, 2012, 2011, 2010, 2007, 2006, and 2005. This red line from the Danish Meteorological Institute shows that Arctic sea ice extent is rising very rapidly. Remember that if your Arctic sea ice extent stays up for more than 3 months, you should immediately contact your climatologist for treatment. This graph, also from the Danish Meteorological Institute, shows Arctic temperatures in 2016 and 2019. 2016 temperatures are in red and 2019 temperatures are in blue. You can see that temperatures cooled about 5 degrees Celsius during the winter since the year 2016. Climate alarmists have attributed most global warming to Arctic winter temperatures, and now they've cooled tremendously over the last 3 years. The current Arctic sea ice extent map from the National Snow and Ice Data Center here in Boulder, Colorado, shows that ice extent is almost exactly at the 1981 to 2010 median. This map shows in green the ice growth which has occurred during the year 2020. But don't let this lull you into a false sense of security, because Nobel laureate Al Gore says the Arctic has been ice-free for 6 years. The news is full of stories about record snowfall, which, if you remember, was supposed to be a thing of the past 20 years ago. This is what Taos Ski Valley in New Mexico looked like yesterday. Data from Rutgers University Global Snow Lab shows that autumn snow extent has been increasing for 50 years to record levels. And a similar story for winter snow extent, which has also been increasing for 50 years. This graph is also from Rutgers University, and the black line shows the annual mean, which has been above average for the past 5 years. The Australian Bureau of Meteorology predicted permanent drought for Australia 12 years ago, but their own graph shows that Australian rainfall has been increasing for 120 years. They're getting a lot of rain in Australia now, and summer rainfall in Australia has also been increasing for the past 120 years. Experts predicted drought for the United States, but like Australia, rainfall has been increasing for over 120 years in the United States. In fact, 3 of the 5 wettest years have occurred since the year 2015. Afternoon temperatures in the U.S. have been declining for a century, and last year was the second coolest on record. This graph shows the official NOAA United States Historical Climatology Network thermometer data before NOAA tampers with it. This graph shows the percent of days above 95 degrees Fahrenheit or 35 degrees Celsius in the United States. As you can see, the percent of hot days has dropped off sharply over the last century. And this graph shows the percent of nights below 0 degrees Fahrenheit or minus 18 degrees Celsius. The U.S. is not only having fewer hot days, but it's also having fewer very cold nights. This graph is very interesting. It shows the average daily temperature range in the United States over the past century. The difference between daytime and nighttime temperatures in the United States has dropped off sharply over the past century. This is known as the diurnal temperature range, and as you can see, last year was the smallest on record, meaning that the U.S. climate has become much more mild. We have fewer hot days and fewer cold nights. Now let's look at forest fires. This forest fire graph from the U.S. Forest Service was prepared during the Obama administration, and it showed that burn acreage has plummeted over the last 80 to 90 years. And it correlates very closely with this graph of heat waves from the National Climate Assessment. In this image, I overlaid the National Climate Assessment heat wave graph in red on top of the U.S. Forest Service burn acreage graph in blue. As you can see, there's a very close correlation between heat waves and burn acreage, and both have plummeted over the last 80 to 90 years. Bernie Sanders thinks we're all going to burn up, but the data shows the exact opposite. One of my favorite predictions was his 2011 prediction from Texas climate academics. 2011 was an extremely hot summer in Texas, and the ambulance-chasing academics took full advantage of it. They said, "Get used to it. The weather of the 21st century will be very much like the hot and dry weather of 2011. Giving extra credibility to this forecast is the fact that the weather extremes that we are presently experiencing were predicted in the first edition of their book in 1995. So imagine that. These academic geniuses predicted in 1995 that Texas would have hot weather sometime in the future. I used to live in Texas, and I seem to remember that it got pretty hot in Texas before 1995 too. Back in the real world outside of academia, precipitation in Texas has been increasing for 125 years, with recent years being among the wettest on record. And before data tampering by NOAA, Texas temperatures have been declining, with 1921 being their hottest year on record. This graph shows the percent of days above 100 degrees Fahrenheit in Texas. As you can see, 2011 was a very hot year, but the trend has been downward over the past century. It's almost like these climate academics conflated weather with climate. Now let's check in with the Maldives. This is what it looked like there yesterday. It doesn't really look like they're underwater. And look at these brave scientists headed out to the water to research sea level rise. The ocean doesn't seem to be behaving as climate experts predicted, and neither are hurricanes. Climate alarmists spent years trying to scare people with the ideas of an increase in the intensity and frequency of hurricanes. But that didn't happen, so 3 years ago the Washington Post became terrified by the lack of hurricanes. And the same story with tornadoes. 2 years ago the Washington Post reported that 2018 would be the first year with no violent tornadoes in the United States. And if you remember, Toto knows all about violent tornadoes. But there's another important deadline coming up tomorrow. Congressional Democrats demanded that YouTube give them a censorship plan for climate skeptics by February 7th, which is tomorrow. They're sick of people like me pointing out all the climate misinformation which they're spreading, and they want us silenced. It's very difficult for them to pull off their scam when citizens are exercising their First Amendment rights to point out all the misinformation being spread by climate alarmists. As far as congressional Democrats are concerned, the First Amendment, the Second Amendment, and many others simply need to go. Nancy Pelosi wants to rip up my State of the Climate address. And as the Babylon Bee reported, she suffered multiple strains and fractures while she was ripping up Trump's State of the Union speech. It will be interesting to see how Google responds to the Democrats' demands tomorrow. The state of the climate is great, but the state of climate science and the state of democratic politics is at an all-time low. Visit Toto on the web at realclimatescience.com. He's been pulling back the curtain on junk science and propaganda for a long time.